Hello, so today we are talking about my worst books of the year. These are the books that I rated the lowest. I went with everything under 3 stars, so everything 2.5 stars and down is on this list. We have 8 books because it has been a year where I have gone outside of my comfort zone, started a book club, opposites attract. I'm naturally going to rack up a few books that don't work for me because of that book club, which is not a negative thing for me because I like reading outside of my comfort zone. I like trying new things and I like discussing books whether I like them or not. So this video is me talking about the books that really did not fit my personal taste. It's not me talking about objectivity, so if you love the books that I didn't love, I'm happy for you. Each of these books, of course, has been talked about before because I do monthly wrap-ups every single month, so if you are interested in getting a more in-depth discussion on any of these books, there is a spreadsheet linked below, linked in the description box of this video, that my wonderful friend Lynn keeps for me, and it shows every book that I've read as well as links the video that I talked about each book. So if you want to go deeper with any of these things, you can there, but I will be at least relatively thorough in this video as well. So let's talk about my least favorite books of the year, the ones that just really did not work for me. We're gonna start off mild and build up to I hated this book, but each review will be spoiler free, and I'll still attempt to keep them thorough while being spoiler free. And we're starting off the video with one of my more mild dislikes, and that is Remarkably Bright Creatures, which I know is a well-loved book. It wasn't for me. So in this book, we follow Tova directly after her husband has passed away and her son has gone missing, and she is working at an aquarium just to keep her busy, to give her something to do, and she's built up a bond with this octopus that's in captivity called Marcellus. Marcellus is unbelievably intelligent. We're in the mind of an octopus that is very observant, his perspective is narrated in like X many days in captivity. We know about how long an octopus lifespan is, and so we know as the days go on that his time here on Earth is dwindling as he's in captivity. He knows how to get out of his tank, but he also knows how long he can be outside of his tank before he needs to reemerge in water. So he'll oftentimes escape and then get back in the tank, and his bond with Tova begins when one time she essentially saves him when he needs to get back into the tank very quickly. We also follow the perspective of Cameron, who is a man who has never grown up. Very irresponsible, very immature, very, like, won't even wipe the chocolate off of his face, just, like, has not grown up yet. Very difficult perspective to be in, if I'm honest. This is very much a small town setting. Everybody knows everybody. It is very immersive, and there's a lot of different character beats and aspects of the setting that I found very charming, yet I did not enjoy this book, mostly because Marcellus was not just octopus intelligent, right? Like, octopi are incredibly intelligent, but it was, I'm solving mysteries that none of the humans can figure out, kind of intelligent, which I guess that's the suspension of disbelief that you have to enjoy the book, is Marcellus is just the best boy, but not in a realistic sense, in an extremely intelligent sense. And then all of the human characters don't figure things out quite so easily. The octopus puts the humans to shame on the intelligence factor, I think. But also, I think as far as the plot beats go, I think that it was very predictable. You know, the way certain characters are introduced, you basically know what kind of character arc they're going to have, the way the mystery is introduced, and the way the characters that are kind of tangling in with the setting. I think that it's very clear how this is all going to go, how this is all going to play out by the end. And with it being a much more slow-paced, introspective story, really talking about about family and grief and having these more important discussions within the story itself, as well as having an ending that I think many people would find very satisfying and very emotional. I understand the appeal of it, but I didn't have much that attached me to it because I found it predictable and because I found some of the characters pretty insufferable. And I wasn't as charmed by Marcellus as so many readers are, which I think would just make me a bad person, maybe? Next up on the more mild end of this list is the next Phi Hunter. This was one of my most anticipated books of the year because it sounded awesome and because it has such a great cover. And I will say the reason this is more on mild and not on rant is because of the world. The Thai folklore that is ingrained in every page of this book is what kept me reading. It's what got me to the end of the book. We're traveling through this world, and as we travel, we're experiencing these different Phi, these different creatures, and the boundaries that they have, the limits on what they can do, and we are following X and Hound, his companion, who... Or actually, I think there was a line that was very specific about no, Hound is not my companion. I don't own him. He's not loyal to me. Like, they have a really funny bond. But anyway, we're following X, who is a Phi Hunter, who is an expert in the field of being able to hunt down these creatures, these beings, and rid them of the world, as well as, oftentimes hawk their body parts in order to survive, in order to have a living, an income. So unfortunately, even in the midst of this incredibly interesting world, wonderful setting, really cool setup, X could have been an interesting character, except that everything was just kind of hinted at about him. He seemed to have an interesting backstory. I guess it'll probably be explored in later novels, but in this one, it's just kind of around, but never explored. His motivations, too, are kind of hinted at, but we don't really get much from it. Hound, really interesting potential, but barely on the page. And then the character that starts the plot, which is a woman who used to be the prince's consort, is now pregnant and running away, and had a complicated relationship with him, and now has a complicated situation in that she's about to give birth and needs to be accompanied across the forest, but the Phi are extra attracted to her because she is pregnant, and so she needs an escort, and that's why X is following with her. So we actually get a little bit more from her. She explains a little bit of her complicated relationship with the prince and her complicated feelings about this pregnancy and everything that's going to come from it. So we actually get a little bit more from her, but even still, I don't really feel like she had much personality. I don't feel like I ever really knew her at all. All of that is fine. I am more of a character reader, but I love environment and world so much that I'm willing to just lean into loving the setting and the folklore and everything that's being explored in the world, and not be too worried about the people, except that the romance in this book was such a big emphasis, and it was so aggravating. They were adults, technically, but the way their interactions read, it was very much fumbling over words, miscommunication galore. At one point, she yells at him and just she's postpartum, she's very upset, she has really complicated feelings about certain aspects of his life, and she rants at him and yells at him, and then she kind of maintains eye contact for a long time, and he's like, I gotta try to kiss her now, right? At one point, he's near bleeding out, and then she makes a move on him, and I'm like, the guy can barely walk. Like, you really should give him a moment. And when he turns her down, she argues with him about it. There's also a certain scene in this book that it was bad. It was a very bad scene, and I kept waiting the whole rest of the book for there to be some sort of fallout because of what happened, and it's like they just moved on. And that was my big complaint about the plot, moving on from the romance, now talking about the plot, is that it seemed like the plot points were plot points instead of something woven together where things would happen and then you wait for that to finish playing out, but it's like, we did that plot point, now it's time to move on to the next plot point, we're doing something else now. And it's like, it didn't feel like things flowed through. It seemed like checklists, like we did our plot point, now we're moving on to the next thing. It felt disjointed to me. Anyway, I think you can see why this is on the list. I loved the world, and then the execution of everything outside of the world just it didn't work. At least not for me. Next on the list is The Answer is No by Frederick Bachman, one of my favorite authors of all time. So this is another book where it's in the I didn't care for it, but it's not a full-blown rant, even though the Phi Hunter did kind of feel like a bit of a rant. Honestly, it would be a full-blown rant if the world weren't so great. The world really drags that rating up higher than my emotions about certain things about that book. Anyway, now we're talking about The Answer is No, which is a short story by Frederick Bachman. This one in particular leans more into Bachman's humor, and as a reader who loves books that are very focused on chaos and humor and nonsense, I've noticed that my lower rated Bachman books oftentimes are his more humor-leaning books. I also wasn't the biggest fan of Anxious People. And the thing is, I love Bachman's humor, but I love it in small doses. What I love the most about Bachman is his incredibly important topics that he chooses to tackle, the nuanced and layered way that he tackles them, and the way that he can take a topic or a point and kind of talk around it in a way, he says it in a roundabout way that actually makes it punch that much harder, so much harder than if he just said the thing outright. But every now and then Bachman doesn't strike that balance, and he says stuff very on the nose. And to me, when things are just outright stated and said on the nose in that way, and it's, you're just telling the readers what they need to think or feel or how they should interpret a scene, to me, that makes the scene less impactful. And I love Bachman for how he can illustrate a point in a way that makes you think and draws you into the conversation rather than just telling you the conversation, if that makes sense. In this book, I didn't think he struck that balance. In this book, it was very on the nose. There were certain scenes especially that I felt battered by the point, and it wasn't a more heavy topic for this book. It was, again, very much leaning into the humor, but when he wanted to actually have a conversation, it seemed like he just had the conversation without me, and I got to read about it afterwards, which is not what I read Bachman for. There were certain scenes that I loved. There was one scene in particular that I was laughing out loud reading, I thought was brilliant. I still think that Bachman did do a good job of illustrating certain elements of what he was saying, particularly certain very natural human traits, human tendencies that I still felt like he articulated in a way that was very Bachman, and then other things that I don't. So overall, anyway, sorry, we're still in the 2.5 range. All three of these books have been 2.5. I didn't hate them, but this was a miss for me. It's under 100 pages, which is why I barely talked about the plot. I didn't talk about the plot. It's a man who wants to be left alone. A frying pan is left out. No one will leave him alone because they're trying to figure out who left the frying pan out. It's all humor. Still in the 2.5 range. Next book we have is The Silent Patient. This was a recent read for me. I actually just finished this book. This book opens up with Alicia, who is found bloody with a gun next to her, and her husband, who has been shot and killed, and, the assumption is she did it. But as soon as they find her, she is not talking. She's completely silent, hence The Silent Patient. And so she's sent to an asylum, and they want to get her to talk, but for years, she won't talk. We're following the first-person perspective of a psychiatrist. I'm trying to remember exactly what his field was, because he looks down on other fields of psychiatry. He's a psychotherapist, I think? Yeah, he's a criminal psychotherapist who gets employed at her residency, where she is, and becomes her personal therapist, trying to understand what happened that day, what led to the crime. He'll interview her family members, he'll talk to her, he'll try to uncover clues. He's trying to solve this mystery so that he can get her help. And all throughout the story, we're also looking at his life, him falling in love, his marital issues, and tying all these things together. Now, I want to be clear, I had a lot of fun reading this book because of the melodrama, because there are certain elements and certain scenes that were so fun. I just felt like I was eating popcorn watching the drama unfold. It's very typical domestic thriller in kind of the type of drama that it leans into and the way things tangle together. I called what was gonna happen in the book in chapter 2. That said, there were other elements, other things that transpired in the book that I totally didn't see coming. In particular, there was a play that was mentioned in this book, and it's obviously going to be tangled in with the mysteries and with what's going on. And I made a prediction about how it was going to be tangled into the story, was totally wrong, and the way it actually was integrated in was so fun. I mean, not fun for the characters, but fun for me, who was eating the popcorn and enjoying. Anyway, I'm trying to be mild about the way that I'm saying things because it's a thriller, and I feel that it's especially important to guard information with thrillers because that's the point of the story. So what I'll say is I found certain reveals infuriating because they didn't work, in my opinion. I think that there were plot holes. I think that there were certain reveals that were there just for the sake of having a good reveal, but not for the sake of it actually making sense within the story. And there were certain parts of it that were extremely aggravating, and other parts of it that made my melodrama loving reader heart so happy. Like, the melodrama in this story was so high, and I loved that. And I'm not being ironic. I'm not being condescending. I mean it. I love melodrama. I love classics like Jane Austen, Du Maurier. I just read Endless Night, and one of the biggest complaints that people have about that book is the melodrama, and that was what I loved so much about it. So the drama that was happening on page was so fun for me, but I don't think that all the reveals actually worked in this story, and I was very frustrated. Anyway, I'm gonna stop talking about this. There's a live stream where I go into so much detail about all the elements with my friend Amaryllis, who loved this book. So if you want more information, it is there. Next up on the list, we're now officially in the 2-star range. We've moved away from 2.5 finally, and we're talking about The Lost Story next. So this was a new release this year. It was one that I was very excited about. It's pitched as Narnia for adults, and there were things that I liked about it, but there were more things that I didn't like about it. So this is following a girl who, her sister has just gone missing, and she enlists the help of a missing persons investigator, detective. I mean, he's not officially anything. He helps find lost girls because he himself, when he was 15, was lost with his best friend. But after months of being lost, they returned, and they returned fine, actually better. They were physically better. They were mentally better. They came back great, except for the friend of the one who now helps lost girls. He came back with no memory whatsoever of what happened. So Jeremy, the one who helps find missing girls, agrees to help our protagonist, whose name I've forgotten actually, Emily. He agrees to help Emily find her sister, but he needs his friend, Rafe, he needs his help to be able to get to where he knows this girl is going to be. The setup I found sometimes interesting, sometimes aggravating. I thought that the buildup of what's obviously going to be a doorway fantasy, because the buildup is clear, but also because the description of the book is Narnia for adults. The buildup of getting to this place that they need to go to find her sister, I thought was intriguing, even though the characters really frustrated me because there was a lot of, like, obviously there's something magical happening here, and Emily just everything over her head, like to the point of he can't know this, so either he's a stalker that's trying to kill you, or there's some other element here. And she's just like, wow, he's a good investigator. And it really irritated me. But really just all of their interactions, how they dealt with each other, how they responded to each other, even the dialogue, it all, again, pitched as Narnia for adults. And everybody in this book is either 30 or everybody in this book is in their 20s or 30s. And everybody in this book acted 15. And then once we actually got to the doorway part of the book, it was this slow build that was actually very charming, despite the characters being not charming in my opinion. But once we got to that part of the book, it like took off like crazy. Things were happening around every quarter. Big, huge, traumatic things were going on, and then we just move on. Characters were building these instant relationships where they were super, super close even though they barely knew each other. It was like, it went from this slow-paced, beautiful build to this very jarring sprint where nothing really felt like it was being developed anymore. In concept, I really liked the idea of this book, but in execution, I just didn't. Next up is A Court of Mist and Fury. We're still in the 2 stars. I'm not going to talk about this one a lot because I feel like people have strong feelings about this book and have hashed them out online so much, whether extremely positive or extremely negative, that I just don't really think that I have anything interesting to say at this point. But I read A Court of Thorns and Roses back when it was the only published book, when that was being super hyped on BookTube. I jumped on, I read it, didn't like it, gave it 2 stars, and said I wasn't going to continue with the series, and then Amberlise got me to read book 2, and I didn't like it. 2 stars again. So these books aren't for me. I don't care for Mass's writing style, I don't care for her characters, I don't care for what she focuses on in her books. Like, these books are not mine. But the main thing that made me distinctly not like this book, because we're not talking about Mass in general, we're talking about this particular book, the main thing was just I felt gaslit. And to be clear, I didn't like Tamlin in book 1. I didn't think that that was a healthy romance either. But the way everything played out in this book was, it seemed like there was such an aggressive shift in everything in Feyre. Actually, to be clear, I really liked the way Feyre's grief and PTSD was explored in this book. I actually thought that that was really strong. But in Feyre and her interests and her alliances, in Tamlin, in Rhysand, in basically everything, I feel... Okay, people always say, the clues were there from book 1. I agree. Again, didn't like the way things played out in book 1 either. But it went from this, there's signs, to just this explosive, over-the-top, here it all is right in your face. And then in book 2, just the same, there's a character that did horrible things in book 1. And in book 2, they're barely addressed, and now that the character is acting a lot nicer, we just like move on. And Feyre too, instead of confronting the trauma that happened in book 1 by Rhysand and saying, hey, you did these things, it was horrible. Instead, she just had internal monologue where she was like, he did these things, but he meant this. Which I just don't think is good writing. Like, I think if you want to change the reader's mind, then you have to take them through the journey of having their mind changed instead of just telling the reader to change their mind. Instead of just making, character assassinating one character instead of like actually building out seeing the shift in them and actually working through the trauma that happened with Rhysand in book 1 to make us like him, instead of just saying, get over it. Feyre has. I'm being a little bit reductive in the way that I'm explaining this, and I know that that's going to be irritating to some people, but honestly, that is the main issue that I had with this book, is it just didn't feel like the shifts were properly explored. I felt like I was just told, accept the shift, this is what we're doing. And I didn't like the first book anyway, so it's not like I expected to like the second book, but I really tried, and it wasn't in the cards for me. Okay, now we're in the, let's see, did I give The Fault in Our Stars 2 stars or 1.5? I think I gave it 1.5. I don't remember, but don't worry, this isn't the worst book, but it is very close. Still living in the 2-star realm, next we have The Fault in Our Stars, which follows Hazel, who has cancer, and she, one day in the cancer support group that she attends, a boy who is in remission named Augustus comes as, he's there to support his friend. They meet, whirlwind romance. So he still has his wish left over from the Make-A-Wish Foundation, and he uses that to help her be able to meet her favorite author. They're both very literary, they're both very pretentious, and actually everyone in this book is very pretentious. Nearly everyone, even side characters that barely get a couple lines. It's like, she's a 16-year-old or something, maybe 17, that is pretending to be British and like uses a faux British accent, and everybody's just fine with it. because everybody's pretentious in their own way. And so like it just anyway, I found the dialogue in this book as well as the characterization incredibly frustrating. We would have situations like Augustus. He would carry around a cigarette and pop it into his mouth regularly, and it was a metaphor because he puts the killing thing right between his lips, but he never lights it up. He never lets it actually do the killing. And it became this repeated metaphor that kept coming back around, to the point that even one time he was on a plane and he popped it in his mouth, and the flight attendant is like, hey, you can't smoke here. And Hazel is like, it's a metaphor. And I'm like, shut up. Like, put the cigarette away. It doesn't need to be here right now. Even certain adults in the book were very frustrating to read from. I did like a lot of the discussion around the kids and their mentality, what their dreams were, how they viewed, what they wanted their last days on Earth, like what they want, or their last days of their lives, what they wanted to make of that, how they viewed the inevitable, and relationships because of their unique situations, as well as how they viewed themselves and being a burden on the people around them by their perspective. Certain conversations had in the book I thought were very good, but I also just felt like the book really, really, really wanted to make me cry. Like, it was trying so hard. And while, again, this was another Opposites Attract book club, we did a live stream, we discussed it in depth. And while we had so many great conversations because of those things that I did like about the book, because of the really poignant lines and the perspective that was given in the book, we had some great conversations around that. I just didn't like the way this book was written. I don't think I like John Green's writing. I've read 2 of his books, I think, and I found both very, very frustrating reads. I think he's really good at having a topic of conversation, but I personally don't care for his novels, or at least the 2 that I've read. If the book was meaningful for you, I do recommend that live stream, because we kind of go more in depth about my specific feelings about the really positive aspects, as well as why the more emotional aspects of it didn't quite strike me the same. Okay, final book on the list. This is the one star I gave out this year. I'm so generous. I'm so kind. It's Bride. Man, this book. Okay, Bride is following a vampire who, in this world, there are the vampires, the werewolves, and the humans, and they have this pact where they have each group, the leaders in that group will give one of their children up to live among the enemy lines as a way of keeping peace. And the idea is, if someone breaks the treaty, if someone breaks the peace that they've established, then you have this significant child with you that you now can kill as, like, you know, the thing that keeps the tension, the thing that keeps anyone from ruining this agreement. So we follow a character who was that. She was given up to live among humans for a period of time, and then she returned among the vampires, but now she's considered an outcast among them, so now she continues to live among humans, just filing down her fangs, wearing colored contacts, so that she can blend in. But now she's been chosen, once again, to be given up, because now we have a new leader of the werewolves, Lo, and she's now going to be given up to be his temporary bride. There are so many things about the general setup of this novel, let alone the lore around it, that just don't make sense. There's a lot of inconsistent lore in this world, but even just the buildup that's given is nonsensical at times. The lore around the vampires and the werewolves is so uninteresting. You strip basically everything interesting about these mythological aspects to the point that it's just like, oh yeah, there's like this weird gene that makes you into a vampire, but you know, we're not undead. We don't actually, sunlight just kind of makes us tired and weak, so we mostly sleep during the day, but we're fine if we need to get up during the daytime. We do drink blood, but we mostly just take from blood banks, which I also take issue with the way that was handled within the world too. Just everything that could be interesting about these creatures just isn't in this book. But then also the lore itself is so inconsistent. Like, will have on-page lore that then 50 pages later is unacknowledged. It doesn't stay relevant, be it the fact that werewolves are said on page to be stronger, faster, able to overpower vampires in every single way. Their fangs are sharper, their fangs can tear through flesh better, can tear you up like M&M's, can shred you like M&M's was a line, which doesn't even make sense. But then, every time our main character flashes her fangs, all the werewolves cower away in fear. Or she kicks someone in the crotch and it stops them from killing her. She was about to be killed. She was completely overpowered, way outmatched. She kicks him in the groin, and then he cowers back and is deemed unable to continue to fight. And then 50 pages later, she's like, I don't really know if I can kick this guy in the crotch because I'm not sure if things work the same down there for them. Even though it just saved her life 50 pages ago. Things kept getting established on page and then forgotten, like multiple times throughout this book. So fine, the setup is there just to get us into the forced situation. The lore is uninteresting and inconsistent, but at least the romance is good, right? Right! Until it's ruined. I actually liked Low. The chemistry on page was actually well written. I thought that certain things were very cringy and uncomfortable, but for the most part, it was actually interesting to read. It was going to get 2 stars. It was going to get 2 stars out of me, except the forced drama at the end. The character assassination that we experienced at the end of this book is one of the worst I've ever read. Like, one line, a character is saying one thing, and then the very next line, it's a complete heel turn. It's a total flip switch. And there's an explanation, but it's weak, it's not good enough. And when we, the reader, are supposed to get over it, our main character just gets over it, and then we move on and get a happy ever after. And I refuse. I reject it. Absolutely not. You cannot go that far south and then just expect me to move on so that I can enjoy the end. Absolutely not. You ruined it! Could have been good! Well, no, it couldn't have. It was dead on arrival. But it could have been less terrible. Those are my worst books of the year. I know I went hard on some of these books. I know I was very blunt about the things that I didn't like about them. And I also know that there will be many people that will disagree with me, and I'm super okay with that. So please, if you disagree with me on these books, if you have a different perspective, if you had a different experience, I'd love to hear from you. I would love to chat about this. Just know that me not liking a book is not me saying, don't read this book. If you hated any of these books like I did, I would love to hear that too. But there you go, those are my worst books of the year. Those are the books that I really didn't enjoy. I was supposed to have a cozy reading vlog up today, but I'm not done reading those cozy books, so that'll be Thursday now. And the best books of the year, of course, is coming very soon as well. Please do chat with me more in the comments. I'll see you again soon. Bye.